Welcome to this YouTube channel. In this video we are going to talk about top 10 facts about Judaism that everyone should know. So before starting this video, like this video, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for future updates. Judaism is the name of the religion, and its followers are known as Jews. Judaism began around 4,000 years ago when the prophet Abraham received a vision from God. Jews believe that there is only one God, with whom they have a special agreement called a covenant. Want to know more about Judaism? Here are 10 interesting facts about Judaism that you probably didn't know before watching this. To make this even more interesting, I want to challenge you as well. How many of these Jewish facts did you know before watching this? Share your result in the comment section. Number 1. Within Judaism there are a variety of religious movements, most of which emerged from Rabbinic Judaism, which holds that God revealed his laws and commandments to Moses on Mount Sinai in the form of both the written and oral Torah. Historically, all or part of this assertion was challenged by various groups such as the Sadducees and Hellenistic Judaism during the Second Temple period, the Karaites during the early and later medieval period, and among segments of the modern non-Orthodox denominations. Some modern branches of Judaism such as humanistic Judaism may be considered secular or non-theistic. Today, the largest Jewish religious movements are Orthodox Judaism, Haredi Judaism, and Modern Orthodox Judaism, Conservative Judaism, and Reform Judaism. Major sources of difference between these groups are their approaches to Jewish law, the authority of the rabbinic tradition, and the significance of the State of Israel. Orthodox Judaism maintains that the Torah and Jewish law are divine in origin, eternal and unalterable, and that they should be strictly followed. Conservative and Reform Judaism are more liberal, with Conservative Judaism generally promoting a more traditionalist interpretation of Judaism's requirements than Reform Judaism. A typical Reform position is that Jewish law should be viewed as a set of general guidelines rather than as a set of restrictions and obligations whose observance is required of all Jews. Historically, special courts enforced Jewish law. Today, these courts still exist, but the practice of Judaism is mostly voluntary. Authority on theological and legal matters is not vested in any one person or organization, but in the sacred texts and the rabbis and scholars who interpret them. Number 2. Judaism has its roots as an organized religion in the Middle East during the Bronze Age. It evolved from ancient Israelite religions around 500 BCE, and is considered one of the oldest monotheistic religions. The Hebrews and Israelites were already referred to as Jews in later books of the Tanakh, such as the Book of Esther, with the term Jews replacing the title Children of Israel. Judaism's texts, traditions and values strongly influenced later Abrahamic religions, including Christianity, Islam and the Baha'i faith. Hebraism, like Hellenism, played a seminal role in the formation of Western civilization, through its impact as a core background element of early Christianity. Number 3. Jews are an ethno-religious group including those born Jewish, in addition to converts to Judaism. In 2015, the world Jewish population was estimated at about 14.3 million, or roughly 0.25% of the total world population. About 43% of all Jews reside in Israel and another 43% reside in the United States and Canada, with most of the remainder living in Europe, and other minority groups spread throughout Latin America, Asia, Africa, and Australia. Unlike other ancient Near Eastern gods, the Hebrew god is portrayed as unitary and solitary. Consequently, the Hebrew god's principal relationships are not with other gods, but with the world, and more specifically, with the people he created. Judaism thus begins with ethical monotheism, the belief that God is one and is concerned with the actions of mankind. According to the Tanakh, Hebrew Bible, God promised Abraham to make of his offspring a great nation. Many generations later, he commanded the nation of Israel to love and worship only one God. That is, the Jewish nation is to reciprocate God's concern for the world. He also commanded the Jewish people to love one another. That is, Jews are to imitate God's love for people. These commandments are but two of a large corpus of commandments and laws that constitute this covenant, which is the substance of Judaism. Number 4. Orthodox and many other Jews do not believe that the revealed Torah consists solely of its written contents, but of its interpretations as well. The study of Torah, in its widest sense, to include both poetry, narrative, and law, and both the Hebrew Bible and the Talmud, is in Judaism itself a sacred act of central importance. For the sages of the Mishnah and Talmud, and for their successors today, the study of Torah was therefore not merely a means to learn the contents of God's revelation, but an end in itself. Number 5. According to Rabbinic Judaism, a Jew is anyone who was either born of a Jewish mother, or who converted to Judaism in accordance with Jewish law. Reconstructionist Judaism and the larger denominations of worldwide progressive Judaism, also known as liberal or Reformed Judaism, accept the child as Jewish if one of the parents is Jewish, if the parents raise the child with a Jewish identity, but not the smaller regional branches. Clarification needed: all mainstream forms of Judaism today are open to sincere converts, although conversion has traditionally been discouraged since the time of the Talmud. The conversion process is evaluated by an authority, and the convert is examined on his or her sincerity and knowledge. Number 6. While there have been Jewish groups whose beliefs were based on the written text of the Torah alone, e.g., the Sadducees and the Karaites, most Jews believe in the oral law. These oral traditions were transmitted by the Pharisee school of thought of ancient Judaism, and were later recorded in written form and expanded upon by the rabbis. According to rabbinical Jewish tradition, God gave both the written law, the Torah, and the oral law to Moses on Mount Sinai. The oral law is the oral tradition is relayed by God to Moses and from him, transmitted and taught to the sages, rabbinic leaders, of each subsequent generation. For centuries, the Torah appeared only as a written text transmitted in parallel with the oral tradition. Fearing that the oral teachings might be forgotten, Rabbi Judah Hanasi undertook the mission of consolidating the various opinions into one body of law which became known as the Mishnah. The Mishnah consists of 63 tractates codifying Jewish law, which are the basis of the Talmud. According to Abraham ben David, the Mishnah was compiled by Rabbi Judah Hanasi, after the destruction of Jerusalem, in Anno Mundi 3949, which corresponds to 189 CE. Number 7. Establishing the core tenets of Judaism in the modern era is even more difficult, given the number and diversity of the contemporary Jewish denominations. Even if to restrict the problem to the most influential intellectual trends of the 19th and 20th century, the matter remains complicated. Thus, for instance, Joseph Soloveitchik's, associated with the modern Orthodox movement, answer to modernity is constituted upon the identification of Judaism with following the halakha, whereas its ultimate goal is to bring the holiness down to the world. Mordecai Kaplan, the founder of the Reconstructionist Judaism, abandons the idea of religion for the sake of identifying Judaism with civilization, and by means of the latter term and secular translation of the core ideas, he tries to embrace as many Jewish denominations as possible. In turn, Solomon Schechter's conservative Judaism was identical with the tradition understood as the interpretation of Torah, in itself being the history of the constant updates and adjustment of the law performed by means of the creative interpretation. Finally, David Phillipson draws the outlines of the Reform movement in Judaism by opposing it to the strict and traditional rabbinical approach, and thus comes to the conclusion similar to that of the conservative movement. Number 8. In the strict sense, in Judaism, unlike Christianity and Islam, there are no fixed universally binding articles of faith, due to their incorporation into the liturgy. Scholars throughout Jewish history have proposed numerous formulations of Judaism's core tenets, all of which have met with criticism. The most popular formulation is Maimonides' 13 Principles of Faith, developed in the 12th century. According to Maimonides, any Jew who rejects even one of these principles would be considered an apostate and a heretic. Jewish scholars have held points of view diverging in various ways from Maimonides' principles. Thus, within Reform Judaism only the first 5 principles are endorsed. Number 9. The basis of Jewish law and tradition, halakha, is the Torah, also known as the Pentateuch or the 5 books of Moses. According to rabbinic tradition, there are 613 commandments in the Torah. Some of these laws are directed only to men or to women, some only to the ancient priestly groups, the Kohanim and Leviim, members of the tribe of Levi, some only to farmers within the land of Israel. Many laws were only applicable when the temple in Jerusalem existed, and only 369 of these commandments are still applicable today. While there have been Jewish groups whose beliefs were based on the written text of the Torah alone, most Jews believe in the oral law. These oral traditions were transmitted by the Pharisee school of thought of ancient Judaism, and were later recorded in written form and expanded upon by the rabbis. Number 10. The land of Israel is the beating heart of the Jewish people. Nearly 4 millennia ago, God promised Abraham, the first Jew, that his children would inhabit the land. Even as the Jews were exiled to the farthest corners of the earth, we have never stopped praying for our return to Israel. As a united nation under God in Israel, the holiest city is Jerusalem. Within Jerusalem, the most sacred spot is the Temple Mount, where Jews generally may not pray today. Thus, the western wall of the Temple Mount is the focal point of our prayers and our national consciousness. What do you think of this list? Do let us know in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear from us again, be sure to hit that subscribe button before you go.